Ethan Carter had always been a man of routine. Every morning, he would wake up at 6:30 a.m., brew a pot of coffee, and sit on his porch, enjoying the quiet serenity of his upscale neighborhood. He had worked tirelessly to afford his home, a modern two-story house with a well-manicured lawn and a state-of-the-art security system. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could unwind after long days at his tech job. But lately, something had been disrupting his peace. His Wi-Fi, usually fast and reliable, had been running unusually slow. At first, Ethan brushed it off, thinking it might be due to too many devices connected or perhaps a temporary glitch. However, as the days went by, the problem persisted. Frustrated, he decided to investigate. One evening, after a particularly slow connection interrupted his work, Ethan logged into his router's admin panel. He scanned the list of connected devices, expecting to see his laptop, phone, and smart TV. But there was an unfamiliar device listed, a device he didn't recognize. His brow furrowed as he checked the device name, KW_device. Ethan's first thought was that someone might have accidentally connected to his network. He changed the Wi-Fi password, hoping that would resolve the issue. Little did he know, this simple act would set off a chain of events that would unravel a web of deceit and crime lurking right next door. The next morning, Ethan was sipping his coffee on the porch when he heard the sharp click of heels on his driveway. He looked up to see his neighbor, Linda Harper, storming toward him. Linda was a woman in her late 40s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an air of entitlement that made Ethan uneasy. She had always been polite but distant, and Ethan had never had more than a passing conversation with her. "Did you change your Wi-Fi password?" Linda demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Ethan was taken aback. "Yeah, I did," he replied calmly. "Why?" Linda's face flushed with anger. "Because my internet stopped working. I've been using that connection for months, and now I can't do anything." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, you've been using my Wi-Fi?" Without asking, Linda scoffed, as if the idea of needing permission was beneath her. "It's just the internet. You people always make a big deal out of nothing. It's not like it costs you anything extra." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "It's my Wi-Fi, and I pay for it. I don't owe you access." Linda's face twisted into an ugly expression of rage. "Oh, I see what's going on," she sneered. "You don't belong in this neighborhood, and now you're trying to play games with the people who actually do. I'm calling the police." Before Ethan could respond, Linda whipped out her phone and dialed 911. He listened in disbelief as she fabricated a story on the spot. "There's a suspicious man in my neighborhood," she said, injecting fake panic into her voice. "He's trying to hack into people's homes. He's harassing me right now. I feel threatened." Ethan shook his head, watching as she smirked at him while speaking. She thought she had power. She thought she could manipulate the system. But Linda had no idea what was coming. As Ethan stood there, waiting for the inevitable arrival of the police, he refused to panic. He wasn't about to let Linda intimidate him. If anything, he was curious to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. She had openly admitted to using his Wi-Fi, but why had she been so desperate to keep it? With nothing else to do but wait, Ethan walked back inside, sat at his desk, and pulled up his router's connection history. The results sent a chill down his spine. At first, he saw the usual activity, basic browsing and streaming. But the deeper he looked, the more disturbing things became. There were multiple visits to racist forums filled with hate speech, conspiracy theories, and calls for violence. Linda had spent hours on these sites, posting under anonymous usernames, spewing venom about minorities, and even doxing people she didn't like. That was bad enough, but then Ethan found something worse. Buried in the data were encrypted transactions linked to fraudulent activities. Someone, Linda, most likely, had been running online scams, selling stolen goods through various marketplaces. There were even traces of what looked like identity theft, with credit card information being processed through shady websites. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. This woman had been committing serious crimes, all while pretending to be a victim. And she had been using his Wi-Fi to do it, probably thinking it would make her harder to trace. His jaw clenched. She had called the police on him over an internet password, yet she was the real criminal. Then he spotted one final damning detail, a login attempt to an illegal site flagged for trafficking explicit material. Ethan's stomach turned. If the authorities dug into her browsing history, there was no telling what else they would find. He quickly took screenshots, saving everything onto a USB drive. Linda had spent years believing she could get away with anything, hiding behind her privilege and weaponizing the police whenever she wanted. But this time, she had picked the wrong person to mess with. The sound of sirens cut through the afternoon air, growing louder as a patrol car pulled up to Ethan's driveway. Two officers stepped out. Officer Ramirez, a tall, composed Hispanic man, and Officer Collins, his shorter, stockier white partner. Both wore unreadable expressions as they approached. Linda, still standing in Ethan's yard, immediately sprang into action. She rushed toward them, her face contorted in a dramatic mix of fear and outrage. "Officers, thank God you're here," she wailed, her voice shaking with fake distress. "That man," she pointed at Ethan with a trembling hand, "he's been hacking into my devices. I think he's stealing personal information from the whole neighborhood. I don't feel safe." Officer Ramirez narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, slow down. What exactly happened?" Linda sucked in a shaky breath, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "I was just sitting in my home, minding my own business, when my internet stopped working. I realized he must have hacked into my network. Then, when I confronted him, he got aggressive. He threatened me and refused to fix what he did. I knew I had to call you before he did something worse." Officer Collins glanced at Ethan, who was standing calmly on his porch, arms crossed. He didn't look the least bit aggressive. In fact, he looked almost bored. "Sir," Officer Ramirez said, turning to Ethan, "what's your side of the story?" Ethan sighed and gestured toward Linda. "This woman has been stealing my Wi-Fi for months. I changed my password this morning, and she showed up at my door, demanding I give her access again. When I refused, she lost it and called you." Officer Ramirez's face remained neutral, but Collins let out a short, skeptical chuckle. "Wait, she called the police because you changed your own Wi-Fi password?" Linda's head snapped toward Collins, her face twisting in anger. "It's more than that. He's been hacking. He's probably doing illegal things online. You need to check his devices before it's too late." Officer Ramirez took out his notepad. "All right, let's slow down here. Linda, you're saying you believe Ethan is hacking into your devices. Do you have any proof?" Linda hesitated. "Well, no, but—" "And Ethan," Ramirez continued, "you're saying she's been using your internet without permission?" Ethan nodded. "And I can prove it." Officer Ramirez and Officer Collins exchanged a glance. Linda's story already had holes, and now the accused man was offering proof. Ramirez gestured toward the house. "All right, let's see what you've got." Linda's confident smirk faltered for the first time. A flicker of unease crossed her face. She had assumed the police would be on her side, as they always were. But this time, things weren't going the way she expected. Ethan led the officers inside, heading straight to his computer. Linda followed reluctantly, standing near the doorway like a caged animal. Her bravado had dimmed, but she still held on to the hope that the situation would swing back in her favor. Ethan plugged in his USB drive and pulled up the files he had saved. "I took a look at my router's history," he explained, clicking through the logs. "Linda's been using my Wi-Fi for a while, and the sites she's been visiting. Let's just say they're not exactly legal." Officer Ramirez and Officer Collins leaned in as the screen displayed the evidence. There were multiple transactions linked to fraudulent websites, messages from extremist forums filled with racist rhetoric, and worst of all, an attempt to access an illegal website flagged for child exploitation. Officer Collins let out a low whistle. "Jesus." Linda went pale. "That's not mine. He's making this up," she shrieked. Ethan didn't even turn to look at her. "Linda, your IP address is right here. You were using my connection, remember? That means everything you did online was logged under my network." Officer Ramirez folded his arms. "So let me get this straight. You've been piggybacking off his Wi-Fi without permission, and now you're saying he somehow fabricated all this?" Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's a setup. He's some kind of hacker. I told you he was dangerous." Ethan finally turned to face her, a slow smirk forming. "Linda, you called the cops on me, thinking I'd get in trouble. But all you did was bring them straight to your crimes." Officer Ramirez exhaled through his nose, looking unimpressed. "Linda, I have to say, this isn't looking good for you." Officer Collins nodded in agreement. Yeah, and you know what? I think we need to dig a little deeper into what else you've been doing. Linda's panic exploded into outright desperation. No, no. This isn't fair. He's the criminal. She lunged at Ethan in a blind rage, her manicured nails aiming for his face. Before she could make contact, Officer Collins caught her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back. That's assault on top of everything else, he said coolly. Linda let out a strangled scream. You can't do this. I'm the victim. You don't understand. Officer Ramirez took out his radio. Dispatch, we have a suspect in custody. Requesting backup for further investigation. Linda's breath hitched. Suspect? No, wait. You don't understand. Ethan crossed his arms, watching as reality crashed down on her. Oh, we understand just fine. For the first time in her life, Linda realized that her cries weren't going to save her. The weight of her situation finally crashed down on her. She was cornered. The officers weren't buying her story, and now they had real evidence against her. But instead of backing down, her desperation exploded into pure rage. You lying thug, she shrieked, her face twisted in fury as she lunged at Ethan. Ethan barely flinched. He had expected this. But before she could even touch him, Officer Collins grabbed her by the arms, locking her in place. Are you out of your damn mind? He barked, tightening his grip as Linda struggled like a wild animal. But she didn't care anymore. All the years of privilege and entitlement, all the times she had weaponized her tears, meant nothing now. She had lost control, and it showed. You think you're going to do this to me? She screamed, thrashing violently. I'm a white woman. You think anyone's going to believe him over me? Then, as if the situation couldn't get worse, she did the unthinkable. She turned to Officer Ramirez, her eyes filled with pure hatred, and spat directly in his face. The room went dead silent. Even Officer Collins, who had been trying to restrain her gently, stiffened in shock. Ethan, who had been standing with quiet amusement, felt his stomach turn. Officer Ramirez wiped his face slowly, his jaw tightening. He had dealt with racism before, but this was something else. His hand hovered near his cuffs as he took a deep breath, steadying himself. Collins shook his head in disgust. Well, congratulations, Linda. You just turned a bad situation into the worst day of your life. Ramirez didn't even look at her. He simply pulled out his handcuffs. Linda Harper, you're under arrest for assaulting an officer, cybercrime, and fraud. The moment those words left his mouth, Linda lost what little sanity she had left. No, you can't do this, she screeched, kicking wildly as Collins helped Ramirez restrain her. I'm the victim. You can't do this to me. Ethan watched as they hauled her outside, her shrieks piercing the air. Neighbors had gathered, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Some were filming, others whispered among themselves. Get your hands off me, Linda wailed, twisting in their grip. He's the real criminal. I was just. Her words were cut off as Officer Ramirez shut the patrol car door. Collins shook his head. She just never knew when to quit, huh? Ethan chuckled. Nope, but I'd say she finally ran out of luck. Ramirez let out a deep sigh, glancing toward Ethan. You handled that better than most people would have. Ethan shrugged. Honestly, I was just waiting for karma to do its thing. Ramirez smirked. Well, looks like karma had some backup today. It didn't take long for the story to spread. By the next morning, Linda Harper's name was plastered all over the news. The headline was brutal. Racist woman arrested after attacking neighbor over Wi-Fi. Shocking cybercrime evidence found. The footage captured by nosy neighbors went viral. The way she screamed, the moment she spat at Officer Ramirez, the arrest, it was all there in crystal clear detail. And the internet devoured it. Linda was no longer just a neighborhood menace. She was now a national disgrace. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Within days, her HOA held an emergency meeting. The decision was unanimous. Linda Harper was officially banned from the neighborhood. Her house, once her prized possession, became a financial noose around her neck. With mounting legal fees and no support from the community, foreclosure was inevitable. Meanwhile, Ethan finally got what he wanted, peace. He sat on his porch one evening, sipping coffee, his Wi-Fi stronger than ever. No more leeching, no more harassment, no more Linda barging onto his property like she owned it. His phone buzzed with a message from a friend. Bro, you're a legend. She really thought she could get away with that. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. She thought she was untouchable, he muttered to himself. Guess she found out otherwise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet. Justice had been served, and for the first time in a long time, it was a good day. In the weeks that followed, Linda's life continued to unravel. The evidence Ethan had provided led to a full-scale investigation into her online activities. Authorities discovered a network of illegal transactions, fraudulent schemes, and disturbing online behavior. Linda was charged with multiple counts of cybercrime, fraud, and assaulting an officer. The media coverage was relentless. Linda's face was everywhere, and her name became synonymous with entitlement and corruption. Her former friends and neighbors distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her downfall. Ethan, on the other hand, became something of a local hero. His calm demeanor and quick thinking had not only exposed Linda's crimes, but also highlighted the importance of cybersecurity. He was invited to speak at community events, sharing his story and offering advice on how to protect oneself from digital threats. As for Linda, she was eventually sentenced to several years in prison. Her house was foreclosed, and her once privileged life was reduced to a cautionary tale. Ethan continued to enjoy his peaceful mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. The neighborhood was quiet once more, and he had finally found the serenity he had always sought. Justice had been served, and for Ethan, that was all that mattered. Ethan Carter had finally found peace. The chaos that Linda Harper had brought into his life was over, or so he thought. The neighborhood was quiet, his Wi-Fi was secure, and the media frenzy surrounding Linda's arrest had died down. Ethan had even started to enjoy his mornings again, sipping coffee on his porch without the fear of Linda barging in uninvited. But peace, as Ethan would soon learn, is often fleeting. One morning, as Ethan was scrolling through the news on his phone, he came across an article that made his blood run cold. Linda Harper had been released on bail. The article detailed how her lawyers had argued that the evidence against her was circumstantial and that she posed no threat to the community. The judge, swayed by their arguments, had granted her release pending trial. Ethan's heart raced. He knew Linda. She wasn't the type to let things go. If anything, her arrest and public humiliation would only fuel her desire for revenge. He quickly checked his security cameras, ensuring they were all functioning properly. He wasn't about to let his guard down, not now. It didn't take long for Linda to make her move. A few days after her release, Ethan received a series of anonymous emails. At first, they were harmless, strange messages that seemed to be random strings of words. But as the days went by, the emails became more menacing. "You think you've won, Ethan?" one email read. "You have no idea what's coming." Ethan's stomach churned. He knew it was Linda. Who else would send him such messages? He forwarded the emails to Officer Ramirez, who assured him that they would look into it. But Ethan knew that without concrete evidence, there was little the police could do. Then, one night, Ethan's security system alerted him to movement outside his house. He grabbed his phone and checked the live feed from his cameras. There, standing in his driveway, was Linda. She was dressed in all black, her face obscured by a hood. She was holding something in her hand, a can of spray paint. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched her vandalize his car, spray painting the words, "You're next," across the hood. He immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, Linda was gone. Officer Ramirez and Officer Collins arrived at Ethan's house within minutes. They took statements, collected evidence, and assured Ethan that they would do everything in their power to catch Linda. But Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. Linda was smart, and she knew how to cover her tracks. Over the next few days, Ethan became increasingly paranoid. He installed additional security cameras, upgraded his alarm system, and even started carrying a small can of pepper spray with him at all times. He knew Linda was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, the police investigation into Linda's activities was gaining traction. They had discovered that she had been using multiple aliases online, each one linked to a different illegal activity. From identity theft to cyberstalking, Linda's digital footprint was vast and disturbing. But despite the mounting evidence, Linda remained elusive. She had gone underground, disappearing from the public eye. The police had issued a warrant for her arrest, but she was nowhere to be found. One evening, As Ethan was working on his laptop, he received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of his house, taken from the street. The message read, "I'm watching you." Ethan's hands trembled as he called Officer Ramirez. "She's here," he said, his voice shaking. "She's outside my house." Ramirez assured Ethan that they would send a patrol car immediately, but Ethan knew he couldn't just sit and wait. He grabbed his phone and started recording, determined to catch Linda in the act. As he stepped outside, he saw a shadow move near the bushes. He approached cautiously, his phone recording every second. Suddenly, Linda emerged from the darkness, her eyes wild with rage. "You think you can ruin my life and get away with it?" she screamed, lunging at him. Ethan barely had time to react. He dodged her attack, but she was relentless. She swung at him with a knife, narrowly missing his arm. Ethan fought back, using his pepper spray to blind her temporarily. But Linda was stronger than she looked, and she quickly recovered. Just as she was about to strike again, the sound of sirens filled the air. Linda hesitated, her eyes darting toward the street. It was all the distraction Ethan needed. He tackled her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. Officer Ramirez and Officer Collins arrived moments later, their guns drawn. They quickly subdued Linda, cuffing her and reading her rights. "You're under arrest," Ramirez said, his voice firm, "for assault, stalking, and violating the terms of your bail." Linda struggled against the cuffs, her face twisted in fury. "You can't do this to me. I'm the victim." Ethan stood back, watching as the officers hauled Linda into the patrol car. His heart was still racing, but he felt a sense of relief. It was over. Linda was finally in custody, and this time, there was no way she would be able to weasel her way out. The trial of Linda Harper was a media spectacle. Reporters from all over the country flocked to the courthouse, eager to cover the case of the entitled neighbor who had turned to crime. Ethan was called to testify, and he recounted the events of the past few months in detail. The evidence against Linda was overwhelming. From the cybercrimes she had committed using Ethan's Wi-Fi to the physical attacks and vandalism, the prosecution had built a rock-solid case. Linda's lawyers tried to argue that she was mentally unstable, but the jury wasn't buying it. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Linda was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Linda's face was a mask of disbelief. She had always thought she was untouchable, that her privilege would protect her. But now, as she was led away in handcuffs, she realized that her reign of terror was over. With Linda behind bars, Ethan finally felt safe. He returned to his routine, enjoying the quiet mornings on his porch and the peace of mind that came with knowing Linda could no longer harm him. But the experience had changed him. He had become more vigilant, more aware of the dangers that could lurk just beneath the surface of everyday life. He started a neighborhood watch program, teaching his neighbors how to protect themselves from cybercrime and physical threats. Ethan also found a new sense of purpose. He began working with local law enforcement, using his tech skills to help track down cybercriminals. He had turned his ordeal into something positive, using his experience to make the world a safer place. As he sat on his porch one evening, sipping coffee and watching the sunset, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a long and difficult journey, but he had come out stronger on the other side. Justice had been served, and for Ethan, that was all that mattered. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.